My name is Cynthia Harris. I'm 70 years old, a widow who has spent most of her life in Seattle, and I still remember the spark of hope I carried that morning when we set off for the trip. My daughter, Tina, had called me weeks earlier, asking if we could take some time away together as a family. I let myself believe it might be our chance to heal the distance that had lingered for years. A chance to sit across from one another and rediscover the closeness that once felt so natural. At the airport, though, I didn't feel like a mother, I felt like a guest. Tina walked ahead with her husband, Troy, while my grandson Levi had headphones in, eyes glued to his phone. No one slowed down to walk beside me. I dragged my suitcase along, and Troy half-joked that since my ticket already covered the baggage fee, I might as well pay for everyone's luggage. I smiled and stayed quiet, though the remark weighed heavier on me than the suitcase handle biting into my palm. When we landed, I forced a smile as they tucked me in the cramped back seat of the rental car. Tina said it would give me more legroom, but the truth was it kept me out of their conversation. They filled the drive with talk of restaurants and plans, laughter spilling forward, while I stared out at the passing sky. I thought about pointing out how beautiful it looked, but the words stuck in my throat. Why speak if no one was listening? That first evening at dinner, Troy patted his pockets and sighed that he had left his wallet behind. The check came to $245, and I slid my card to the waiter. He thanked him, but not me. The silence that followed felt like a curtain dropping. I told myself they were probably just tired, but the sting of covering the bill without even a glance of gratitude lingered long after the plates were cleared. The next morning, they stopped at a cafe to take photos. Tina posed with Troy, and Levi snapped picture after picture while I sat off to the side with a cup of lukewarm tea. I asked if they wanted a group photo, but Tina brushed it off, saying they were in a hurry. I watched them scroll through the shots, laughing together, while my chair scraped against the tile as if to remind me I was there, just not included. Later that night, scrolling through Levi's social media, I saw the photo. The three of them smiling with the caption, "Best trip ever, just us three." My chest tightened as I closed the phone. I had come hoping to be part of a family trip. Instead, the words confirmed what I already felt. I wasn't part of it at all. Each morning I hauled bags from the hotel, while Troy tossed them my way without asking. I paid for meals, tickets, extras, receipts tucked into my purse like souvenirs of how little I mattered. The pattern was always the same. They turned to me when something needed carrying or paying, and then turned away. By the fourth day, the weight wasn't just on my shoulders, it pressed down on my heart. I had wanted laughter. Even just one moment where Tina looked at me and remembered I was her mother. Instead, I sat in lobbies as they planned outings without me, or at dinner tables where my only role was to cover the check. I smiled. I nodded. But inside, I was disappearing. It's a strange thing, being physically present yet invisible. Their voices filled the air, but none of it reached me. Each small humiliation stacked onto the last until I felt like I was vanishing in plain sight. I had wanted this trip to stitch us together, but each day pulled the seams looser. By then I knew. I wasn't holding on to them anymore, only to the hope. At the border, the road was clogged with cars crawling forward under a punishing mid-morning sun. The heat shimmered off the pavement, and exhaust hung thick in the air. Tina and Troy walked ahead with Levi between them, laughter mingling with the hum of engines. I trailed behind, two heavy bags digging into my shoulders, sandals slipping on the uneven gravel, sweat trickling down my back. They stopped to point at the "Welcome to Canada" sign and posed for pictures as if nothing else existed. Then Troy glanced over his shoulder and said, sharp but casual, "If she can't keep up, she can carry the bags or walk home." His words cut deep, and the silence that followed cut deeper. Tina said nothing. Levi chuckled under his breath. In that moment I knew I had been erased. The sound of their laughter blurred into the low rumble of traffic. My grip slackened on the straps, my heartbeat thudding louder than the cars. Slowly, I bent down, set the bags neatly on the white border line and stood upright. For a moment, I just stood there, the straps dangling empty from my hands, my shoulders suddenly light, almost weightless, though my chest ached. Their voices faded as they moved on without a glance back. To my right stood a small, weathered blue sign with an arrow pointing down a narrow road toward a village whose name I couldn't pronounce. Its paint was fading, yet it felt like a beacon. I turned toward it, my pulse steadying with each breath. The sun burned on my neck, sweat stung my eyes, but a calm spread through me. I stepped off the crowded road and onto the narrow path, each step deliberate, as if even time had slowed to watch. The bags I left behind sat on the borderline, a marker of the life I was no longer willing to carry. In that instant, the choice became final. My dignity mattered more than belonging to people who refused to see me. The noise, the heat, their laughter, all of it faded as I walked away, not with drama, but with the quiet strength of someone who had finally chosen herself. The narrow road led to a small turnout where an old bus idled, paint peeling, letters worn. I asked the driver in hesitant words if it went to the nearest town, and he nodded. I dropped $3 into the box, slid into a cracked vinyl seat by the window, and let my body sink. The bus rumbled forward, pulling away from the border and down a quiet road lined with tall trees. Sunlight slipped through the branches, scattering across my face as though the world itself had given me permission to pause. I powered my phone down completely and tucked it into my purse. In the stillness that followed, I discovered silence could feel like air rushing into tired lungs. Outside the window, cottages lined with flower boxes passed by, a little bakery with misted glass, and children tossing stones into a fountain. The town's sign read Haven Ridge, though the letters on its wooden board were barely legible. It seemed like a place untouched by urgency, a place where no one expected me to carry burdens that weren't mine. When the bus stopped, I stepped onto a cobblestone path leading to a small inn with white shutters and flower pots brightening the windowsills. As I pushed open the door, the bell above chimed softly. A woman with silver hair and gentle eyes, later introducing herself as Marjorie, looked at me carefully and said with a tender smile, "Quiet is good for the bones." She handed me the key to a modest room with pale curtains and a view of rolling hills. I set my small bag on the bed and listened to the faint birdsong drifting through the open window. For the first time in years, something inside me loosened, and I drew a breath that felt real, like stepping into a life where I no longer had to vanish. The next morning, the inn was hushed, broken only by the creak of old wood and birds outside. I carried my purse into the lobby, where a dusty guest computer sat on a desk. My hands trembled once as I logged in, but the moment the page appeared, my focus sharpened like steel. I called the bank. A calm woman on the line asked if I wanted to revoke secondary access on my account. I said yes. When she requested the name to remove, I gave her Tina's. My voice stayed steady. The screen refreshed, confirming the change, and for the first time in years, I felt a chain fall away. Next, I phoned my lawyer in Seattle, the same man who had guided me since George's passing. He answered warmly, asking if I was all right. I told him I wanted to sell the family house and update my will. He paused only briefly before assuring me he'd start the paperwork at once. His steady tone felt like a doorway opening, and I walked through without hesitation. I instructed him to leave my estate to my nieces, the ones who still sent Christmas cards and never forgot my birthday. They lived far, but they had never erased me. Soon documents arrived in my inbox. I opened the files on that old computer, read each line, then hit print. The machine whirred, delivering the pages that carried my future. With a borrowed pen, I signed my name, each stroke heavy, final, like engraving into stone. I stacked the papers neatly, scanned them back, and pressed send. A confirmation email appeared in black text against the glow of the screen. My reflection stared back, older, but steadier than ever before. Leaning closer, I whispered, "This is the last time I pay for my own humiliation." The words filled the empty lobby, and silence seemed to echo them in agreement. It wasn't a loud victory, but it was enough. Justice didn't arrive through begging or shouting. It came from reclaiming what was mine with the quiet strength of a signature. That evening, I sat at the desk in my room, a blank page before me. Haven Ridge wrapped around me like a warm blanket, and for the first time in so long, I felt ready to speak, even if no one else would hear it. I began writing to Levi, the boy who once called me Grandma C, who clung to my neck with sticky fingers after drawing dragons and lopsided hearts. I told him I didn't walk away out of weakness. I walked away because they all believed I never would. I wrote that I had a life before he was born, filled with stories and scars, and I deserved to be more than the woman who carried bags and paid bills. The letter was tender, yet firm, woven with love but also weighted with grief I could no longer hold. When I finished, I folded it and slipped it into the drawer beside the bed. I didn't address it, didn't prepare it for the mail. It wasn't meant to be sent. It was meant to release me from the truths I had swallowed for too long. Sitting back, my thoughts turned to Tina, my daughter, sharp with me on this trip. Deep down, I knew her cruelty wasn't born entirely from malice, but from fear. She had grown up in a house where money was scarce, where she always felt there wasn't enough, and that hunger for control had never left her. Scarcity had shaped her, and she had passed that weight to me without realizing it. That awareness didn't erase the harm of her words, but it softened the edges of my anger. I could forgive her without opening the door again. I could see her wounds without letting them shape my future. In that quiet room, with hills stretching beyond the window, I felt both the ache of love and the freedom of release, and both belonged to me. 6 months later, my life bore no resemblance to the one I had left. I rented a small apartment near a lake outside Seattle, where mornings began with sunlight spilling over the water and ducks drifting peacefully across the surface. By the door hung a single key on a wooden hook. It wasn't decoration. It was a promise that only I would decide who entered my home. One afternoon, a knock came. Opening the door, I found Tina, clutching a paper cup of coffee. She looked thinner, her eyes heavy with shadows, and she whispered an apology. I invited her inside, and we sat across from each other at the small table by the window. She admitted she wanted to make things right, that she had replayed the trip over and over, and shame followed her with every memory. I listened quietly, but when she asked if we could return to how things once were, I shook my head. I told her that apologies were not a reset button. They mattered, but they could not erase what had been done. Her eyes brimmed, and she nodded slowly, as though she already knew I would not bend this time. We exchanged a few more soft but weighted words. As she rose to leave, she touched my shoulder lightly and said she hoped we might one day find a new path. I told her perhaps, but only if respect came first. That evening, I walked to the lake with Walter, a widower I had met at the library. He carried a thermos of coffee, and we sat on a bench as the breeze tugged at my scarf. Birds called from the trees, and the water glowed with late daylight. We didn't speak of the past. We let the quiet be enough. As I sipped the warm coffee, peace settled deep into my bones, as if it had been waiting for me all along. I thought of the bags I'd left behind, of the silence that once frightened me, but now felt like a gift. They told me to walk home. And I did. For the first time, home belonged to me. Life has a way of teaching us that respect cannot be begged. Cynthia's story is proof that dignity begins the moment we refuse to carry what was never ours. Setting boundaries doesn't mean love ends. It means choosing love that doesn't erase us. Especially as we grow older, it's easy to feel like side characters in our own families. But the truth is, we still hold the right to decide who sits at our table, who receives a key, and who earns a place in our hearts. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Cynthia's place? Subscribe for more stories of resilience, self-respect, and healing. And if someone you know needs this reminder, share this video with them today. Tomorrow, something special awaits.